today we're going to talk about what's new in Dynamo for Revit 2023.1.1. If that's a little new to you, let's talk about that for a little bit. So Revit 2023.1 came out, and shortly after .1.1 came out, because they left something out. So that's just kind of how Revit is sometimes, and they forget something and it kind of happens.
I keep having this nagging feeling that I've forgotten something.
Hey, if you forgot it, it probably wasn't all that important.
Yeah, I guess.
With that said, 2023.1 did come with a new Dynamo release. This is exciting because this is a release that was previously talked about on the Dynamo blog way back on September 22nd. So just to have a little bit of a review here, and I do have some notes about some of the features I'm excited about because there are a lot of new features that we're seeing for the first time in Revit. So we'll go through them as well. But to go back a little bit, Dynamo has a few different flavors. Back in Revit 2020, Dynamo started to come with Revit installs, which means you didn't have to install Dynamo, which made things way easier on the surface. The downside is new features come out in Dynamo Core, which is another flavor of Dynamo, and you don't see those for a very long time when it comes to the Revit integration. In addition to that, if they break something in Dynamo, you have to wait till a point release to update Dynamo, which just sucks. It is awful. It's the worst user experience ever if you have to copy DLLs, and I'll just keep telling everyone that. For the longest time, we wanted Dynamo to become out of the box Revit. It finally did, and it caused more problems than it fixed, honestly. Revit 2023.0 came with a serious bug for setting parameters in Dynamo, which is something that probably most people watching this do in Dynamo. That bug was not able to be fixed until this 2023.1 release here in October/November. Terrible user experience, and it drives me crazy, but we'll kind of move on for that now. But 2023.1.1's out, so let's go ahead and see what this blog post says. Once again, it's in September 22nd, this blog post. Helena really did a great job talking about all the new features, and these all pertain to Dynamo Core. The thing here is this was Dynamo Core at the time. Dynamo Core is relying on something new called Autodesk Shape Manager, a new version of it to fix polycurves. So in this release, there's a whole lot of polycurve nodes that are really exciting, that help a lot along the way, but we weren't able to see that until a Revit release came out. So this core release was pretty unusable for quite a while, which kind of stinks. Kind of an interesting thing as well. In addition to this is the blog post that summarizes everything, but the release notes actually have it broken down quite a bit more. So I tend to read release notes on GitHub. I just kind of nerd out on these. That way you don't have to, so you're welcome. But we are going to cover some of the features that I think are most exciting in here as well. So let's open up Dynamo within Revit. And if we go to Dynamo About, we'll see that we have the latest version that is 2.16.1. So first, probably my favorite feature that's not talked about at all actually. On the blog post, if we do Control F for rename, there is nothing in here about renaming other than this node manager, which I covered in a previous video, so I'll link that below as well. The renaming thing just talks about node colors changing and things like that. However, in 2.16, they did sneak in a rename thing on the node name. So over here, if we go ahead and search for rename, you are able to edit a node inline. Not documented on the blog post, but in the release notes it is. So if we kind of zoom in, and let's say I want this to say select 3D view, if I double click, I'm able to type right in line on the node name. Epic. This is a really great feature, and I think it's going to be awesome because the interaction of a pop-up appearing somewhere on the screen is just not great. So this is going to help a lot of people, which is awesome. Another thing in here is if you do zoom out, you will get that pop-up once again, and you can use it that way as well. So that's still in there for us. Pretty nice to have that access to that as well. Another big one that I once again covered in a previous video when 2.13 Core came out was the Graph Node Manager. When this first came out, the team asked me for my feedback on it. And at first I was like, oh, this is great. I want it in Revit though, because upgrading Dynamo graphs to this new dark node version in 2.13 on Revit 23 is awful. How do I get this in that version? And you couldn't until now. So what's really nice about this is you can start to go through and replace nodes, highlight them, see what nodes are having errors, see which ones are inputs. All that kind of stuff's in here, which is really nice. So this is input is in here, and all these nodes are currently input. So you can kind of come in and start to clean things up in that way. Really awesome. This feature in Revit is a huge incentive to upgrade graphs from Revit 22 or older to Revit 23. So I think this one's a really welcome change. This graph node manager does a whole lot of stuff. You can export this out to Excel if you really want to. I don't know why you'd want to unless you can build a graph from Excel, but you can't. So I don't see myself using that feature. But yeah, another thing in here is if you were to freeze some nodes or something like that and zoom out, you do get that little snowflake or eyeball if it's on a disabled preview. So that's a contextual thing that's in here now, which is really nice because you can start to see that stuff quickly and highlight it. So that's another feature that's been kind of snuck into these versions as well. In addition to these new features that are user facing, there are quite a few. Once again, I want to highlight my favorite. There is an additional node in the input category under basic for custom selection. So if you are a Dynamo user for Dynamo Player in Revit, custom selection is something we've wanted for a very, very long time. So we are able to offer a drop down with some kind of user facing text that lets you pick something inside of these fields. The one consideration here, though, is if you have mixed data, it's going to convert to the lowest standing data type. So like if we look at the object type, and we'll go ahead and run this, we will see that it converted those numbers to strings as well because I have mixed data in there. I added a letter A, which turned all of the data into strings. So you can't have that mixed. Another subtle change is this color changing based on the data type. So a number is blue for a number data type. For a string, it is orange. So that's kind of cool as well. That's something that's subtle, but I think appreciated when it comes to outputting it on this custom selection. If we go ahead and rename this, so we'll say select something. We'll make it an input. I'll go ahead and hit save. If we were to open this in Dynamo Player, which I don't have to close Dynamo for any longer, which is sweet, we can just see that I do have that custom selection in here for me to be able to use. This is great because you can pre-bake in categories, use a category by name, title block types by name, mark parameters that you want people to set. You could build this stuff into your graph and have it serialized right in there, which is awesome. So that's a super welcome feature. I want that node in all versions of Dynamo, but we only have it in 2023.1 and up. So that's just kind of how that works. If you use this node, it will be unresolved in older versions of Dynamo. So while really useful in 23, I don't know that this is something that will get widely adopted until we have more users in 23 and the next versions and so on. Just because of that backwards compatibility thing that just isn't there. There's no infrastructure to use this in an older version of Revit because once again, I can't update Dynamo. That's just kind of how it is. Not my favorite thing, unfortunately. Another thing that's really cool, so if we go to, I'm just going to search for this one, a get number node. This is new as well. So given a string, so if I go ahead and do a code block and do like AE 101 or something that's like a sheet number, and I hit run, this will actually extract the number from the string as a string given mixed values. This is huge because if you're doing something that compares levels to things like level 1 and you want to remove all the views that are like level 1, view whatever, all these different ones, you can start to extract that number out and truly start to break that down as well. So when removing views or drafting views or things like that that have a naming convention that echoes like a level name, for instance. So if we look for a level, O1 entry level, and we do element.name, and we run it, we'll see that it obtains O1. So if you have plan O1, elevation O1, whatever the heck it is, you can start to use this number to do some lookups as well. extracting that number is something that's super useful. And that's a new node that's actually contributed from the community. So really awesome. That is a community contribution that made its way in, which I really like. Another pretty neat node in here are the polycurve nodes. I won't go into all these examples, but I will kind of open the category to show them. They have a node called heal. They have another one that's by grouped curves, closing with line, offset fixes, things like that. Those are in the blog post, which I linked below, so check that out as well. And that's pretty exciting. Another one that's really exciting under the abstract category is to get a minimum volume bounding box. So if we have a geometry, so let's go ahead and do a geometry. We'll pick like a floor or something in this sample model. I'll go ahead and edit this floor to be a non-orthogonal shape. We'll close this. Cool. So that's kind of an interesting shape, right? So I have that floor selected, and if I get its geometry, we'll see, let's go ahead and hit run on this guy. We'll see that that's that geometry. In the past, if we were to do a bounding box by geometry, you won't see it in the viewport until you convert it to a cuboid. So what we'll do here is we'll convert that. You'll see that it is surrounding the whole floor. So what it is it's actually axis aligned. And that's been something we've had to deal with for a very long time in Dynamo. So if we were to edit this visibility here, so if we go to preferences, we should be able to change it to isolate the selected geometry. That's my cuboid, and that's my geometry. So you can see a slight ghosting of it here towards how it's surrounding it. For a minimum volume bounding box, so let's go ahead and do that real quick. And we'll convert that to a cuboid. We'll see that that's actually a different shape now. It's doing a bit of a rubber banding or shrink wrapping around that geometry to be the minimum bounding rectangle of it. So that is the smallest rectangle that will fit around that geometry. So if I were to come in and actually rotate this some, so let's do a rotate, just do something kind of crazy. It's going to freak out on me. I hit run again. You will see that that minimum volume bounding box is still kind of surrounding that. This node's really useful for estimating some of the area of things. I would have loved the access to this node when I was building some of my calculations for area occupancies based on built-in casework and things like that. Axis aligned kind of stink when it comes to these things, because if you were to have, like, let's say a chair or a table or a casework or something, and you have it kind of kinked, it will show up as that overall bounding outside of it. So this same floor, for instance, if I were to change this to a cuboid, that's a big old square that's representing a tiny floor in relation to this square. So this node's really exciting. It's now in there, and I'm excited to see that in there as well. Once again, the blog post really highlights a lot of this stuff that's new when it's user facing. So Graph Node Manager, they really went off on. Another thing is you need to enable directories to be able to open Dynamo files. This one I understand why, but I don't love it because you get pop-ups when your users are opening graphs now. So a new user will start to see, hey, this is untrusted. The word untrusted is a little strange to me, especially when it comes to a graph they might have opened in Revit 22. Kind of weird, but you are able to go in and disable that trust warning or map to your resource drive or whatever have you for your Dynamo graphs. So yeah, there you have it. Those are some of the new updates for Dynamo 2.16.1 and 23.1.1. Let me know what you think below. What are you most excited about? And yeah, let me know what else you want to see below for some of these features. I will be testing this with all my graphs and kind of see what I run into as well. But this does fix quite a few bugs that we've had in Revit 23, which is exciting, all while adding a few new features. So shout out to the team for actually adding some new features while fixing a lot of broken stuff this round, which is kind of interesting. So yeah, I'll see you in the next one, and thanks for checking out this video.